Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast. I'm your host, Christian Harris, the founder of Slip Safety Services. I'm joined today by Mel Blackmore to talk about everything you need to know ISO or something like that. I'm sure I can come up with a catchy headline for the episode, which you'll see when this is posted. But Mel is the host of the ISO Show, a podcast all about ISO accreditation. She's the founder of a consulting business, which has been helping businesses clients to achieve accreditation for the last 15 years. She's recently, as she tells us, set up an online hub as well to provide a lower cost kind of done with you way of achieving accreditation too. And we delve into everything around this subject: trends, myth busting, benefits, what you need to know, and much more. So I hope you will enjoy this episode. If you do, as always, we'd really appreciate follows, likes, subscribes, comments, and all that stuff. Please do leave a review as well, because that helps the algorithms to spread the word to more people that would be interested in joining us on this journey of promoting best practice and proactivity in safety and risk. Let's join the conversation then with myself and Mel Blackmore. Cheers. Welcome to the podcast, Mel. Thanks for joining me.
Great. Thanks very much for inviting me, Christian. It's an honour to be here.
Great. Well, and I know you love podcasts and you love your subject so much that you named your podcast after your subject of choice.
That's right. Yes, the ISO Show. Yeah.
It's a good name. It does what it says on the tin. How's that all going?
Yeah, it's surprisingly taken off, actually. When I first did it, I wasn't quite sure, if there was an audience for it, but yeah, we have actually people listening in from 35 different countries.
Wow.
We've had over 15,000 listeners as well. So, I think at the end of the day, a podcast is great if you're looking at speaking with an international audience. And because we deal with international standards, it's the perfect communication channel to kind of share the love of our ISO standards.
Yeah. I mean, some people even listen to this. So, people listen to anything.
Well, I think sometimes it's better to niche down, if there is something that that you're passionate about, and that it's going to help to raise standards, and obviously that's the area that we're both in terms of reducing risk and raising standards, then I think there will always be an audience for it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's never going to be the Joe Rogan podcast, but I started the podcast because I was a huge fan of podcasts. I always have been. And I did a number of interviews on other people's podcasts. And then I was thinking to myself, oh, I really should do my own podcast. And then sort of lockdown for me was the catalyst, because then I thought, well, actually, I can now get people, where they know they're going to be sitting at home, and therefore I can book some of these interviews in. Whereas before I was thought, oh, it's going to be quite tricky to get hold of the people that I want to talk to, and scheduling in the time.
Yeah, same here. I used to have some long trips going up to Cumbria, and so I used to listen to a lot of podcasts there. And I was thinking, well, wouldn't it be great if somebody was dispelling myths and sharing tips around ISO standards? And I thought, well, yeah, why not go for it? And yeah, so I really enjoy doing it, actually, speaking with different business owners. And I was speaking with somebody from the facilities management standard as well, on the technical committee of the standard. Just after COP26 that we've just had recently, I was interviewing somebody on the sustainable finance ISO standard that's just coming out. So yeah, it's great to be able to get to speak to people, have conversations about topics that hopefully other people will enjoy and share.
Yes, and learn from and be educated and make dispel some of those myths and make good decisions. As sharing knowledge, isn't it, at the end of the day?
Sure, yeah.
So how did you get so passionate about this topic then?
Well, I actually got a first flavour for total quality management back at university, but I actually did a degree in maritime leisure management. So some may call it a deck chair degree. So there's a lot of power boating going on and sailing and things like that. But we did actually do some work, and one of the modules was on operations management, and it covered total quality management. And I don't know why that subject just resonated with me. It's all about continuous improvement. And so I worked in the city as a quality manager, and then I started my own business about 15 years ago. So that's Blackmores UK Limited.
Yeah.
And it's kind of grown from there, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we deal with 21 different ISO standards now across risk, quality and sustainability.
So I imagine the sustainability standards, those must have got more popular over the years.
Yes, absolutely. ISO 14001 is the most popular standard globally for environmental management, but we've seen offshoots from that standard over the last few years. So sustainable event management standards, ISO 20121, which was launched at the Olympics for the first Sustainable Olympics. And we went on to implement that at Wembley Stadium. And more recently, the carbon standards. So we've actually developed an offering around these standards because we've been working in the energy space for some time now, for over 10 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, the carbon footprint verification and carbon neutrality standards are really taking off in the UK right now.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. How people's perceptions of what's important change and shift as time goes on. So if we take a step back or sort of fly up to 30,000 feet and just sort of take a layman's approach to this, I mean, why are standards and accreditations important?
Well, I think if we're looking at like health and safety, for example,
yeah,
anybody can claim to have a health and safety policy. It doesn't mean to say it's any good and that it actually does the job of reducing risk. So by having a health and safety management system in place, it means that you're systemizing what you're doing so that it's a framework for managing health and safety within an organization. But also, it's not just you claiming that you've got this system in place. You're actually creating it in compliance with an international standard, and that international standard has been developed by various industries across numerous countries across the globe. So it is truly a standard of best practice. So not only are you aligning your health and safety systems to a standard like ISO 45001, but for those organisations that decide to take the leap and go for certification, they get the badge. So that's basically an independent third-party certification body. And if your listeners are in the UK, I would only recommend going with a UCAS accredited certification body. So that's been approved by the government. And you get the nice shiny badge, which is a crown with a tick and the standard. So it's a way of proving that you're actually serious about this. So if it's health and safety, yes, you can demonstrate with credibility and confidence that your health and safety system is up to the high standards.
Yeah, makes sense. And you're certainly right that lots of policies are often not worth the paper that they're written on. So when then in a company's journey, is the right time to be looking at this? Do you have to be of a certain size or a certain years of trading or a certain level of maturity?
Any business of any size can implement an ISO standard, regardless of the stage of the journey that they're on. So we've implemented ISO standards for startups, and also very mature, multinational organisations as well. At the end of the day, it provides a framework for an organisation. So if we are looking at health and safety standards, if we take an example of a guy that came to us probably about 8 years ago now, he came from an FM company, facilities management company, and he was an expert in air conditioning, heating, etc., maintenance. And he wanted to start his own business. And he knew, coming from an organisation that had that structure, they had the policies and procedures in place, that he wanted that for his own business because he had plans not just to be a one-man band, but to upscale quite rapidly. And he knew that he needed to have those systems in place. So at the time, he was working from his garage, and it was him and his wife that was the business. And they implemented ISO 9001, the quality standard, 14,001 environmental, and the health and safety standard, which at that time it was known as 18,001. Oh, so that's 18,001. And at the time I did question, are you sure you don't want to kind of get the business running and maybe look at the quality system first of all? And he said, no, he said, I know what we need to do and how we need to do it. I just need some help in putting that together and aligning it with the standards and getting certified, because I want to be able to compete with the big boys when it comes to tenders, even though we're only small outfits.
Yeah.
So we did that, and very rapidly, within a few years, they got to 1 million, and now they're into the multi-millions. So sometimes an organization just needs that framework to be able to upscale. They need that blueprint, because at the end of the day, one person can't do everything. You do need to be able to, if it's dealing with new business, you want to be able to capture that in a process. If it's, if you've got a certain way you want to be able to deliver your services, that could be maintaining air conditioning units. You can't expect somebody coming into the business to know what's in your head and how you do it. So it's always good to try and get that down into some type of process. And it doesn't have to be written either, it could be video.
Okay. And I imagine that, that's an extreme, obviously, of the chap and his wife. But I guess that if you can do it sort of earlier on, it's a little bit easier, because there are fewer things happening to document and everything. And then you can sort of grow with the systems in place.
Yeah, it can be. And I think the key is keeping it simple. So you don't need to have lots of documented policies and procedures when you're running a business. Just keep it simple. If there's something that you do well, capture that in the process so that you can then give that to others to follow. If it's about reducing risk, obviously you want to be able to have very clear controls about that. And again, share that and make sure that people are following that. Yeah.
And would people typically start with, the health and safety side of it, or might they do an operational thing first to sort of get going, or how what order do people typically do these in?
Yeah, it's a good question. A few years ago, it would have been 9001 that they started with. And many organisations have got mature health and safety manuals and systems in place. But there's a few areas that it needs refining in. We need to dot the I's and cross the T's to kind of, bring it up to kind of a bit of a higher level. But more often than not, now we're actually implementing integrated business management systems for companies.
Right.
So a client that we just started working with last month, we're implementing quality, environment and information security standards for them as one business management system.
Yeah.
So, a number of years ago, you would have had separate manuals. It might have even been a hard copy manual.
Well, those are the days.
Yeah. Whereas now, just you'd have everything available on SharePoint.
Yeah.
That your business needs. Yeah.
And I suppose I don't know if this is the right word, but the pain of getting it organised and it's almost worth trying to do as much as you can at the same time, rather than sort of spreading that pain, again, probably not the right word, but you know what I mean, over a longer period of time. So kind of do it all in a job lot, and then it's all done, I guess.
It can be, and I think because it just in the last 4 or 5 years, I think it was 2018 when the main revisions came out for the standards. The standards are now based on something called Annex SL, which basically means it has the same common framework, regardless of whether it's a health and safety standard, environment or quality. So actually, once you've implemented one, you're at least a third of the way to achieving compliance, with other ISO standards.
Yeah.
So before, each standard was slightly different, but now you've got that common framework. It's so much easier just to bring another standard into your business. And you don't need to go for certification either. There are all sorts of different standards that businesses adopt, like a sustainable procurement standard. If you want to have a competitive edge when it comes to tendering and, improving procurement and making it more sustainable, then why not cherry pick from an international standard? Because it does help to give you a USP as well from a marketing perspective.
Yeah, that's true. And what are some of the other benefits then? So we've talked about having that USP and being able to compete with bigger businesses or other businesses from a tendering business development perspective. But I guess there are other, big benefits as well that people get. I mean, what have you seen over the years? What would your clients say have been some of the big benefits that they've achieved by putting these things in place?
Well, I mean, one of our clients, Exponentially, they've been a client for many years. They've got about 5 or 6 different ISO standards, and they basically said it wouldn't have the growth of the business and the contracts that they wouldn't have been made possible without those ISO standards. So in some industries, they are a passport to trade.
Yeah.
So in the tech space, for example, you're looking at information security, quality, business continuity. And then in construction, it could be 9, 14, 45, so quality, environment, health and safety. In the data center world, then you're generally looking at about 4 ISO standards, because energy management is one of the biggest costs to data centers. So it makes sense to focus on that and be able to maximize on your resources when it comes to energy management, because obviously it's not just a massive cost to the business, but also to the environment as well.
Yeah. So and I guess so. What's coming out for me is that it's not just a piece of paper. It's actually, there's a lot of benefits and a lot of advantages you get from it. But I mean, what you talked a bit about busting some myths with the podcast. I mean, where do you find that people sort of often have these kind of misperceptions about what this entails or what the benefits are that you need to kind of overcome to influence them to go down this route?
Yeah, I think a lot of people still have this kind of box ticking mentality, that it is just a piece of paper, when actually it's so much more than that. And I think a lot of people think about the old BS 5750 days, which was a predecessor to 9001, which was very, very prescriptive. It said you had to have these 20 mandatory procedures. When the standards today aren't anything like that. It's all based on your business risks and opportunities, and you develop your own unique framework for managing your business. But it's obviously aligned with best practice at a global level.
Yeah.
So I'd say probably one of the biggest myths is that there's a lot of paperwork involved, when actually there isn't. I mean, we as a business, we've got 9001, and this year we introduced a system called Monday.com. I don't know if
I've heard of it, but I couldn't tell you what it does exactly.
Yeah, so I mean, you can get it as a free subscription. We've got the paid for one, but I got it initially as a project management tool, but it's so flexible. We use it now for our HR system. So if somebody wants to log a holiday request, we use it for managing our projects. We actually got rid of our sales CRM. We've designed our own within Monday.com. We weren't IT experts, it's really customizable. But the reason I'm mentioning that is that we don't have Excel documents now within the business. We have very few Word documents. If we want to show somebody how to do something, quite often we'll use short video clips, and then we'll screen share. So yes, we've got process maps, but I think there is that common misconception, that you need to have a manual. And quite often, these systems, your way of working, are weaved into, whatever platform you're using. If it's Microsoft 365, SharePoint, Wiki, it's just whatever works for your business. So I think that's probably one of the biggest myths, and also that it's expensive and time consuming, when actually you can implement ISO standards at a very low cost.
I guess so that's where having some expert help will be beneficial as well, in terms of doing it as efficiently as possible. so that it is, although there's an investment in the help, you're minimising your loss of time and effort to do it.
Yeah, I mean, we've been established for 15 years now, so we've been working with hundreds of businesses to implement various ISO standards across a number of countries. And some businesses like somebody to come in to support them to, yeah, as you've correctly said, Christian, to help to save time, you know, and more often than not, what we're doing is interpreting the standards requirements.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a clause within most of the ISO standards, which is called context of the organization, and most people will be thinking, what the hell is that then?
Yeah.
But we just interpret that as, well, actually it's your risks and opportunities, so let's run a workshop. We'll help to facilitate a SWOT. So what are your organization's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats?
Yeah.
Let's look at some objectives. What are the top 3 things that might be keeping your finance team awake at night, or operations, or sales and marketing? And from that, we can identify, okay, these are the areas that we need to focus on. And yeah.
So that sounds like a very sensible thing that all companies should be doing anyway.
Yes, you'd like to think so, yeah. But some businesses are so involved in the day-to-day running of the business, they don't get an opportunity to take a step back and look more strategically about how they want the business to look and how they want to operate. Where are the opportunities for improvement? Where are the duplications? Where are the main bottlenecks? What are the things that are costing your business money? So more often than not, working with somebody who's impartial and a fresh pair of eyes coming into your business, that can help to prioritize things, really.
Yeah.
Because all businesses, have opportunities for improvement. We do. We're no different to any other business. But we also introduced an online portal as well, which means that you don't have to pay for a consultant. You can actually get access to a membership portal at a much lower cost if people would rather implement ISO standards themselves, but they'd like some templates, video tutorials, e-learning and things like that. So that's something we launched this year. Yeah,
I was going to ask you about that. That's a good idea. And I'm doing something not dissimilar in the world of kind of slips and trips, and doing like a sort of e-learning portal plus with various other bits and bobs on it. What have you used to build that, if you don't mind me asking, software wise?
Well, multiple applications and tools, actually. So you can get off the shelf membership platforms, but we decided to create our own website, but we've kind of built in different widgets and tools in order to be able to kind of bring it all together. So there's about half a dozen or so in total. But yeah, ultimately that's our own website that we've created with.
Yeah, which has got some good value then, because it's worth more than if it's an off the shelf tool.
Yeah, but it's based on a WordPress site. Yeah, with just different widgets added in.
Yeah. I found this thing called Kajabi, which you may have looked at.
Yes, we did. Yeah,
which is pretty good. So version 1 of my portal is using that, but we might sort of. I looked into creating something from scratch, but it's quite expensive and time consuming to do it, isn't it? So I thought, well, let's just get it. Let's not let perfect be the enemy of good, and let's get it up and running first.
Yeah, no, go for it, definitely. I mean, the only reason that we managed to fast track it and to create the bespoke system is that we won an Innovate UK competition. So we actually won funding to basically innovate our industry. So this is actually a game changer within our profession. So typically a business would either get training on how to implement an ISO standard pre-COVID. Obviously now you can get e-learning courses, or you would get a consultant in. Now, what we wanted to do was to be able to provide a global platform, so almost like a Netflix version of ISO standard support that's available 24/7. You could dip in and out of. So we that wouldn't have been made possible if we hadn't have won that Innovate UK funding competition, and that was to drive innovation when we were in lockdown.
Yeah.
So that's why we managed to fast track that, probably by a couple of years, actually. I think if we hadn't have had that, it would have taken us about 3 years.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, that congratulations. I mean, that's great success, even just winning the award, never mind actually then coming up with a finished article and getting it up and running. And I mean, how's that going so far in terms of uptake?
Yeah, good. I mean, we've trialed it with some of our clients so far, and we've got some other companies that are using it at the moment. One of the things that we're going to be doing next year is rolling it out to all of our ISO support clients. So we've got a lot of clients that are on a retainer with us, where they might already have a system in place, like ISO 45001, when we go in and support them with their internal audits and legal compliance.
Yeah.
So we're going to be offering that free of charge for 6 months. So that'll be a good way to, again, put it to the test and see what other useful content they would like within it.
Yeah.
Because we're adding content to it every month.
Yeah. Yeah, because I'm sure you get asked different questions, or you come across different things, or certain practices change, I suppose. So you need to be constantly refreshing it, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's important, not to get too hung up on this, the standards world as well, because ultimately, let's say if we're looking at health and safety, yes, there are modules in there on ISO 45001, but they're also useful. We've got these things called quick wins in there. So it's how to set up a Loom video. So you might want to send your message about health and safety via video. And now these are just kind of either low cost or no cost. And if you want to record a 5-minute video that's less than 5 minutes, there's a quick win on how to set that up, how to set up your net promoter score. How to do that, how to create a process, using process mapping tools and things like that. So there's lots of things that will help businesses generally to improve communication, engagement, regardless of which standard they're implementing or currently certified to.
That's great. I mean, that sounds like a big change and a big shift, and be really interesting to follow that over the coming years. And I think that the combination of having that portal tool plus the podcast with the global reach, that'd be very interesting to track your growth over the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, it's early days yet, so fingers crossed.
Yeah. So we've just talked about a big change in the industry that you're driving with tech, and we talked a bit earlier as well about sort of sustainability and the environment and how that's kind of become more important. What other kind of changes can you see on the horizon in the landscape of standards and accreditations?
Yeah, I think we're seeing companies adopting ISO standards that are actually guidance documents. So a good example of that is ISO 45003, which is all about occupational health. So we know that since lockdown, some of the issues around mental health have been compounded as a result of the environments that we've been working in. And ISO 45003 helps you to identify the risks and the hazards associated with psychological health and safety risks. Now, that isn't a certifiable standard, but some businesses are taking that and basically improving their existing health and safety systems by cherry picking aspects of that. And for us, this is just fantastic, because it's not just a tick box. It is all about continued improvement and demonstrating that best practice, both internally and to other key stakeholders as well. So I think that's an interesting area. Another is within the carbon space, we've got a number of verification standards, which is pretty new. So you might be thinking, well, what's the difference between verification and certification? So if a business wants to adopt the health and safety standard ISO 45001, they can get certified, and that certificate's valid for 3 years. With carbon verification, it's a bit like an MOT. So you need to keep doing that every 12 months because in 2 years' time, you might not be, you might not have identified what your carbon footprint is. And same with carbon neutrality as well. You can't always claim to be carbon neutral. You need to keep doing that each year. So that's something that the certification bodies in the UK and Europe are adapting to.
And how do these standards get set in terms of how regularly are they reviewed? So that you said that if you've got certification, it's a 3-year period. So does that mean then that any changes within that 3 years, it doesn't matter to you? You then just measure yourself against what the latest is after the 3 years, and how often do the goalposts sort of shift?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So quite often with any new standard, it takes a couple of years to actually create it. And that's because, let's say in the UK, you'll have the BSI, British Standards Institution, will coordinate a technical committee, and there will be representatives from industry, okay, which could be, let's say if it's a facilities management standard, you'll have all the key players in FM that are contributing towards the development of that standard. But quite often that can be a BS, a British standard. Okay, yeah. So a good example of a British standard is the data privacy standard. So everybody said about GDPR. Well, the Brits decided that they were going to have a standard for data privacy. Okay, so that was a BS. But that's now become an ISO. So the next stage, once it's a British standard, and this can be the same in other countries, if there is an appetite for it at an international level, then there will be representatives like a BSI, but in the States, in China, Japan, etc. And they'll come together collectively to turn that national standard into an international standard. And sometimes there isn't actually that much change that goes on. And once that standard's published, obviously they're not going to go through that process every year of reviewing and updating it. Yeah. So it actually gets done about every 8 to 10 years. And then a company will still have 3 to 4 years generally to upgrade to the latest version.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I've been involved, not personally, but sort of peripherally, with some work that people around the world have been trying to do around slip resistance standards, and getting agreement between different countries seems very, very difficult, and certainly in this particular area. Is that the case often, or typically is agreement sort of fairly easily found when you're updating existing standards, for example?
It's all driven by demand, really. So actually, when you come to think about it, there are actually a lot of standards that we created in the UK that are now international standards. So it was a British standard for sustainable events. And when we won the Olympics bid, and they wanted to be the first sustainable Olympics, they were like, okay, so why not use this standard? But then other countries also wanted a piece of the cake as well. Yeah. And for it to be a truly kind of, representative for other countries that they could adopt as well. So so that was driven through demand for more sustainable events, because there was and there still is such a lot of waste in that industry. So it's usually driven by demand. So if in your field, Christian, that there is a demand from a health and safety perspective, although I think what we'd have to be careful of there is that the standards that you'd be looking at potentially initiating, whether they are product standards or whether they're for companies managing an organization. So there are actually thousands of standards available. So as you know, if you pick up a fire extinguisher or look at a panel of double glazing, there's probably something on there like some type of BS or kite mark.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So they are different. So they're on products, and it's a slightly different route with products compared to the standards that we've been talking about, which is the management system standards for businesses.
Yeah, there's a BSEN standard for slip testing, for example, how to slip test a floor, but in different countries they kind of use different methods of testing, and they sort of, so in America, they don't want to use the testing method that we have a British standard for example. So it's kind of everyone's butting heads about that. So I don't think that's an argument that's going to be solved anytime soon, I'm afraid to say. But
well, I don't know if it's just the health and safety profession, because as you probably know, OSAS 18001 was an OSAS standard, occupational health and safety standard, for many, many years. And so many people in the industry were calling out for it to be an ISO standard. But there was such a lot of disagreement at an international level on very specific areas within that standard. They just couldn't agree on it. And so it literally, took, I think, at least 15 years of consultation. So I think health and safety is, it's definitely an interesting area that causes quite fiery debates.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Nobody likes to be told that the way that they're doing something is not safe, I suppose, when they think it's safe. So I guess that's that's a perception challenge to overcome. What about, I try not to use this word if I can help it, particularly on the podcast, but what about the dreaded B word for Brexit? Is that going to have any effect in terms of, I know in certain areas, there was regulatory alignment with the EU, which is now we're moving away from? Will that have an effect on this space at all?
If anything, it could potentially accelerate demand for standards because it's written in a common language for all businesses to understand. We haven't had any seen any negative effects from Brexit. We have seen a number of changes when it comes to products, though, in terms of the involvement that UCAS have had. So UCAS are the United Kingdom Accreditation Service that accredit certification schemes, including products. So where you've got the EN markings, I think that's been affected for sure. So clients that have had products with certain markings are now looking at alternative markings. But in the space that we operate in for businesses, then no, we haven't. But interestingly, since the pandemic, I think with remote working, it's definitely opened doors for more international clients. It's much easier to be able to work on consultation projects, across multiple countries projects now. So I think I know obviously it's not the same thing as Brexit, but that's probably one of the other changes that we've seen in terms of the internationalization of this place that we're working in right now. Yeah,
absolutely. Great. Is there anything that I should have asked you, but I haven't, because I'm conscious that I've been grilling you hard with lots of no, not hard-hitting questions, but is there anything, any key points that the audience would benefit from knowing about that we haven't managed to touch upon, or have we done a relatively good job of covering everything?
I think you've done a fantastic job, Christian. Thank you for giving me a grilling today. I've actually quite enjoyed it.
I wasn't teeing you up for that. It was a genuine question. I wasn't teeing you up for that. Okay, no, that's great, because I think it's really useful. And I mean, I suppose what I've learned is that busting some of those myths and thinking about some of the wider benefits, and then a bit more detail of the process and things like that, which I didn't know about before. So I'm sure others will have benefited as well. So wrapping things up then, Mel, obviously we've mentioned the podcast, but could you give us sort of any other plugs, mention the website and social media and all that good stuff? Where can people find out more, and what's the best way of people reaching out to you as well if they've got any further questions, or if they'd like to sort of look into getting some of your support with this stuff?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, and also I think if you can go to our website, so that's blackmoresuk.com. There's a wealth of information, short videos on different standards and case studies, things like that, so you can get a feel for the impact that standards have. But I think probably the podcast is, I'd say, the most engaging content when it comes to listening to other people's stories and some of the challenges that they faced, some of the successes that they've had as well. So we've interviewed lots of different clients, from BP Charge Masters. They started out as a small company that we worked with that literally hand assembled EV charging points, EV charging points. They've now been taken over by BP Chargemaster, through to facilities management clients, law firms. So quite varied. If you want to find out a little bit more about what other businesses have done. But also we have some like masterclasses on there to explain about different standards. So if you did want to find out more about ISO 45003 on occupational health and safety, then I'm chatting with Darren, who's our standards expert in that field, and picking his brains on it so that we can kind of break down that standard, kind of unpack it for our listeners, so they can see how that could be applied. One of the things I can do, Christian, is send over to you a link to a free ISO standards blueprint. So it's like a checklist. So if a company does want to consider implementing an ISO standard, it helps you to look at what you've already got in place. So you're probably not starting from scratch. And it also takes you through our kind of our process. So we have a 7-step process to implementing any ISO standard. And it's literally just been trademarked officially as of last week. So that's called ISOlogy. So it's basically the methodology that we've refined over the last 15 years, and we're now making that available via the ISOlogy hub and our consultancy services as well.
Oh, perfect. Well, what we'll do then is we'll link to, if you send me that, I'll sort of figure out where to host it in some way, or if there's a link to it being hosted, but we'll put it into the show notes.
Send a link over to the download. But it basically goes through step by step everything you need to do to plan, create, launch, and get certified. So it's a step-by-step guide on what you need to do. So we'll provide that free of charge.
Perfect. Well, that's great. I really appreciate that, and thanks very much for sharing your story and your insights today. Really enjoyed it. Hope everyone else at home did as well. And we will see you again next week for another good interview. Thanks a lot, Mel.
Okay, thanks, Christian. Pleasure to be here. Really enjoyed it.